She was left at the church steps after the baby cried. Then a silent rancher whispered, "She'll sleep under my roof tonight." Arizona Territory, 1876. The church in Dry Creek rose above the dusty street, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the noon sun. Inside the air was thick with perfume, candle smoke, and whispers. Every pew was filled, farmers in worn coats, wives in stiff dresses, merchants with watch chains flashing, waiting to witness the wedding of Thomas Hale, prosperous merchant, and Eliza Whitfield, daughter of a family drowning in debt. At the altar, Eliza trembled in a simple white gown. The lace was yellowed, the bouquet of dried flowers fragile in her hands. Behind her, her parents sat rigid, eyes fixed on Thomas, their hopes tied to the bride price that would save their farm. Thomas stood tall, smug in his fine suit, a faint scent of cigars clinging to him, his thin smile looked more like triumph than affection. The priest raised his voice. "Do you, Thomas Hale, take this woman to be your lawful wife?" "I do," Thomas replied smoothly, like sealing a bargain. "And do you, Eliza Whitfield?" The vow broke off. From the side chamber came the sharp cry of an infant. Heads turned. A pale servant girl appeared, clutching a swaddled baby. The wail filled the church like thunder. Gasps spread. "Eliza has a child," someone hissed. "A bastard," another cried. Eliza's bouquet slipped to the stone floor. Thomas's face darkened. "You lied to me," he roared. "You expect me to raise another man's bastard?" "No, please." Her voice shook, drowned by whispers rising into jeers. Thomas ripped the ring from his pocket and flung it at her feet. "There will be no wedding. Let the whole town see what kind of woman she is." The congregation erupted. Mothers clutched daughters closer. Men muttered of shame. Eliza's parents lowered their faces. Her father stood, left without a word. Her mother followed, skirts brushing past their disgraced child. "Wait," Eliza cried, reaching for them, but they did not turn back. Her knees buckled. She stumbled from the altar, cradling the baby to her chest. Tears blurred her vision as the crowd's insults rained down. "Oh, liar," she tricked him. The words cut like knives. She sank at the foot of the steps, her sobs lost in the clamor. The child whimpered, her only anchor in a world collapsing around her. And then silence. The voices faltered. A shadow stretched across the aisle. Boots struck the floor, slow and deliberate. Caleb Ward, the rancher, had stood near the back, silent as always, broad-shouldered, sun-hardened. A man who kept to himself, known more for solitude than words. Now he stepped forward, his gray eyes steady on the woman huddled with her child. Eliza lifted her tear-streaked face. Stunned, Caleb stopped beside her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came low, gravel rough, cutting through the last whispers. "She'll sleep under my roof tonight." The room stilled. Some scoffed, others muttered, but none challenged the calm finality in his tone. He bent and offered his hand. Eliza hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. He lifted her with quiet strength, steadying her as if she weighed nothing. The baby stirred, then softened against her chest. Thomas sneered from the altar, but his bluster faded under Caleb's unyielding gaze. Without another word, Caleb guided Eliza down the aisle, his arm firm around her shoulders. The church doors swung open and the storm's wind rushed in, scattering candles and hymn sheets. Together they stepped into the rain, leaving behind jeers, shame, and the ruin of promises that had never been real. And though Eliza's heart ached, the warmth of his arm told her one truth she had never known before. She was no longer alone. The desert stretched wide and silent as Caleb guided his horse across the barren flats, the night wind pressing sharp against them. Behind him, Elisa clutched her child, her dress still damp from the storm, her cheek resting against the coarse wool of his coat. She knew almost nothing of this man, only his name, Caleb Ward, a rancher of few words who kept to himself. Yet she rode with him now, her baby pressed to her chest, each hoofbeat carrying her farther from shame and ruin. At last, a homestead rose out of the dark, a squat ranch house of weathered timber, its roof patched, fences stretching toward cattle pens. It was no rich man's estate, but one built with hard hands and quiet endurance. Caleb dismounted, then turned to lift Eliza gently down. Her legs trembled, but his steady grip anchored her. She parted her lips. Thanks, apology, something. But silence held her. His silence swallowed it whole. He opened the door and motioned her inside. The room smelled of smoke and leather. A scarred table stood near the hearth. Jars lined a shelf. A rifle leaned in the corner. Boots rested by the door. It was the home of a man who asked little of life but labor and solitude. Caleb hung her shawl to dry, struck a match, and coaxed the fire to life. Shadows leapt across the walls. Without a word, he laid a fresh log, then pulled a folded blanket from a trunk and placed it neatly on the bed. Eliza clutched her child at the doorway, confusion twisting with gratitude. Why would he do this? Open his home when the town had turned its back. She watched as he crouched to set a kettle on the fire, then moved to fix the broken window latch so the wind would not creep through. His motions were efficient, patient, the rhythm of a man used to mending what others might discard. The baby whimpered. Caleb glanced over, eyes softening. He warmed a strip of cloth by the flames and handed it to her. The child quieted, sinking into sleep. Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but only tears gathered. The silence was not cold. It felt steady, like shelter after storm. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Her baby slept, and Eliza thought the night might hold peace. Then came the sound. Boots on dirt, voices cutting through the quiet. Lantern light flickered against the windows. Open up, Ward, a voice barked. You're hiding her in there. That lying in her bastard don't belong under your roof. The baby stirred, crying again. Eliza clutched it close, her hands trembling. The fists pounded harder. Bring her out, let the town judge her proper. She'll ruin you too, rancher. The porch groaned under the weight of men. Cheers bled through the walls. Then a crash. The latch gave and the door slammed open. A man lunged forward, hand outstretched for the child. Eliza's scream pierced the air. Caleb moved like lightning, his Colt-cleared leather, hammer-cocked, muzzle flaring as a single shot cracked the night sky. The bullet tore into darkness above, echoing across the flats. The crowd froze. Smoke curled from the revolver as Caleb leveled his gaze on them all, gray eyes cold as steel. You touch her or the child, he said, voice low and steady, and I'll bury you right here. The man who had lunged stumbled back, hands shaking. Mothers drew children close. The bravest muttered curses, but none stepped forward. Eliza stood trembling, tears streaming. For the first time, someone had stood between her and the world, not for gold, not for gain, but to shield her. Her baby cried softly, and she pressed her lips to its head, sobbing with relief. Caleb lowered his gun, holstered it with calm finality, then pushed the door shut against the voices. The latch held this time. Inside the small house, the fire crackled on. Eliza clutched her child and looked at the man who had claimed nothing, asked nothing, yet given her more than anyone else had dared. She had been abandoned at the church steps, cast aside by her family, scorned by an entire town. But under this roof, with this silent rancher, she and her child had been granted what she thought gone forever. Protection, and perhaps, in the quiet strength of his presence, the fragile beginning of something more. Morning light spilled across the desert, painting the ranch in pale gold. Eliza woke with her baby pressed close, wrapped in the rough wool blanket Caleb had given her. For the first time in weeks, her sleep had not been broken by jars or cold stone walls, but by the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She rose slowly, her body weak, but her heart restless. The small house felt strange yet safe. She wanted to prove she was not only a burden, not just a woman hiding behind another's strength. With trembling hands, she gathered water, scrubbed a shirt, and tried to make a meal from the meager supplies on the shelf. By the time Caleb returned from the corral, dust clinging to his boots, the table held bread and beans. Eliza waited nervously, brushing her child's hair with her fingers. You should sit, he said quietly, his eyes scanning both the dishes and her pale face. I wanted to help, she whispered. He didn't argue. Instead, he set a folded scrap of paper by her bowl. She glanced down, reading the words in rough, deliberate strokes. Rest. The fence can wait. Her throat tightened. He could have ordered her back to bed. Instead, he left her dignity intact. That night, the baby's wails shattered the quiet. Exhausted, Eliza rocked him, whispering soothing words, but the cries only grew. Her arms sagged with fatigue. Then Caleb filled the doorway. Without a word, he stepped forward, lifting the child from her trembling arms. Sleep, he murmured, his gaze fixed on the infant. He sat by the hearth, large, scarred hands cradling the baby with surprising gentleness. Then he whistled low and steady, a rough tune likely born of ranch nights under endless skies. The melody threaded through the room, patient and sure, until the child's sobs softened into silence. Eliza sat on the bed, her heart quivering. She had never seen a man so tender, never felt hope tremble so dangerously close to her grief. In the days that followed, Caleb's silence became its own language. One morning, he returned from the barn with a small tin pail, setting it on the table. "Oats milk," he said simply. The baby drank eagerly. Relief swept Eliza's chest, though her thanks caught in her throat. He only tipped his hat before returning to his chores. Later, while folding laundry, she noticed her dress laid neatly on a chair. The torn sleeve had been mended, clumsy, uneven stitches yet carefully done. She traced the lines of thread, eyes stinging. His hands were built for rope and res, not needles, yet he had tried. She pressed the dress to her chest, moved beyond words. Her thoughts drifted backward to the life she had left. She remembered her parents' weary faces, the cracks in their hands, the desperation hanging over their cabin like a storm. Debt had strangled them, hunger gnawed daily. When Thomas, the wealthy merchant, offered marriage, it was less a proposal than a bargain. She had agreed. She buried her love, her secret, and stood at the altar so her family might survive. She believed she could endure anything. But when her baby's cry betrayed her, when Thomas's fury turned the bargain to ash, she had been left with nothing but shame. Now in a stranger's home, she held proof of something else. Goat's milk offered without word, stitches sewn by clumsy hands, a whistle that soothed her child. She pressed her lips to her baby's hair and let herself breathe. For the first time since the church steps, she was not merely surviving. She was being cared for. And though silence still stretched between her and Caleb, it was no longer empty. It was filling with meaning words could never hold. The desert night lay heavy around the ranch house. The wind rattling shutters with a mournful cry. The fire in the hearth had sunk to embers, casting faint red glow across the room. Eliza stirred in her sleep, sweat beading her brow, arms wrapped tight around her child. Caleb sat in his chair by the window, hat pulled low, rifle across his knees. Sleep rarely found him. He listened instead to the wind, to the creak of the house, to the soft rhythm of breaths. Then came the sound that froze him. Not coyotes, not the horse outside, but the broken murmur of a woman tangled in dreams. "No, Daniel, don't. The land, blood everywhere." Her voice cracked into sobs. Caleb's jaw tightened. The name Daniel hung in the air like smoke. Eliza clutched the child tighter, whimpering even in sleep. He sat still until dawn light palled the horizon. Then he rose. The decision made. When Eliza awoke, her baby cooed softly beside her. She blinked, then saw Caleb at the table, shoulders squared. He poured water into a tin cup without looking at her. "You called a name last night," he said. Eliza froze. "What, Daniel?" Caleb answered evenly. "You spoke of land, of blood. Who was he?" Her throat closed. For long moments she sat silent, clutching her child. His voice cut again, low but relentless. "Tell me the truth." Her shoulders sagged. The secret weighed too heavy to carry. "Daniel was the man I loved," she whispered. "A cowboy, poor but kind. We dreamed of a ranch, a life carved from dust. He fought to claim land with his own hands." Her voice broke. "But Thomas wanted that land, too. He tried to buy it." Daniel refused. Then came the night men with guns fired shots that tore him down. They called it a quarrel. I knew whose coin paid them. Tears streamed down her cheeks. When my parents learned of the child, they panicked. "Daniel gone. Debts crushing us." Thomas offered marriage, money enough to save them. They begged me, "Think of the family." So I did. I hid my baby. I walked to the altar, ready to trade my love, my soul for survival. But when my child cried, the truth spilled out, and Thomas threw me away like dirt. Silence pressed the room. Caleb's hand clenched on the tin until it groaned. He turned, eyes shadowed by storm. "My brother," he said at last, voice low as gravel. "He wanted land, too. A patch near the river. Merchants came with papers signed by sheriffs who never saw the soil. When my brother stood against them, they put him in the ground and called it justice." He set the cup down hard. The men behind it walked free. Men like Thomas. Eliza trembled. "I am sorry. I should never have." But Caleb cut her off, his gaze fixed beyond her on the horizon. He pulled a saddle strap tight, leather creaking under his fists. "We're not done with him." Eliza's breath caught. There was no comfort in his tone, no promise of safety, only a vow carved from grief. The baby stirred, fussing softly. Eliza bent to hush it, tears dampening its hair. Caleb did not step closer, did not soften his voice, but the set of his shoulders told her one thing. The secret was no longer hers alone. The sun dipped low, casting the ranch in long shadows. The air was too still, too heavy. Caleb had noticed hoof prints earlier, faint tracks across the dry earth, but said nothing. His rifle rested near the door as he worked silently on a bridle. Eliza fed the baby near the hearth, her hands trembling, though she could not say why. Something inside whispered of danger. The first shot shattered the quiet. Glass burst from the window, shards scattering across the floor. Down, Caleb barked, pulling Eliza and the baby to the ground as another bullet thudded into the wall. Voices roared outside, "Come out, Ward, hand over the woman, and maybe we'll let you breathe another day." Thomas's men. Caleb's jaw tightened. He snatched up his rifle, shoved the door open, and fired. One man fell screaming into the dust. Gunfire erupted. Men surged from behind rocks and posts, bullets tearing into the walls. Caleb moved with deadly precision. Each shot measured, each step steady. He fired from the doorway, the trough, the barn. One by one, the attackers dropped. Yet more pressed closer. Inside, Eliza huddled with her baby, whispering prayers over the roar of gunfire. Then the door burst open. A wild-mazed man lunged inside, knife flashing, his gaze fixed on the child. "No," Eliza screamed, throwing herself in front of the cradle. Caleb was faster. He hurled himself across the room, seizing the baby and pulling it to his chest. His broad back shielded the infant as the knife slashed down, ripping leather but sparing flesh. Caleb twisted, revolver flashing twice. The attacker fell, knife clattering across the floor. The room fell silent, but for the baby's cries. Caleb knelt in the fire's glow. The child pressed against him, his gray eyes softened as he looked down at the tiny face. "It's all right," he murmured, rough but steady. "You're safe now." Eliza froze, tears streaming. For the first time, she saw more than the silent rancher. She saw a man who carried death on his hip, yet held her child as though it were sacred. Outside, the remaining gunmen faltered. Shaken by their comrade's fate, they fled into the desert. Caleb did not pursue. He stayed kneeling, handcuffing the baby's head until its sobs faded to quiet whimpers. When he returned the child, his hands lingered a moment longer than needed. Eliza clutched her baby, whispering, You risk your life for us." He gave no answer. He only reloaded his revolver, jaw set, silence heavier than words. Later, after the bodies were dragged beyond the fence, and the house patched as best as possible, the fire burned low. Eliza lay restless on her bed. From the corner of her eye, she saw Caleb seated by the hearth, the baby cradled in his arms. He rocked the child gently, his scarred hand stroking its back. A low hum slipped from his lips, halting old like a tune born under wide skies. Slowly the child stilled, drifting into sleep. The sight struck Eliza harder than any bullet. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears glimmering. This man, who had spoken so little since the day he carried her from the church, now sat before the fire, humming her child to peace. Her heart shifted. Amid blood and terror, something fragile and undeniable had taken root. For the first time, she did not feel cursed. She felt safe because Caleb Ward had chosen, without words, to stand between her and the world. And as firelight painted him in gold and shadow, Eliza knew her heart had begun to stir, dangerous and tender, toward the silent rancher who had whispered her salvation. The desert night was still, the fire crackling low in the circle of stones. The air smelled of sage and smoke, heavy after the chaos of the week before. Caleb sat with his back to a post, one boot stretched toward the fire, rifle within reach. Beside him, Elisa fed the baby, its small hands clutching her dress as if holding on to life itself. It had been days since the attack, but the echoes of gunfire still haunted her chest. She had barely begun to breathe again when another shadow crossed their fragile peace. The sound of hooves came first, steady and unhurried. Caleb rose, hand brushing the colt at his hip. From the dark horizon emerged a lean, scarred figure who dismounted with the ease of a man too long in the saddle. Jed Carver. Once he and Caleb had ridden the borderlands together, fighting raiders, hunting outlaws, sharing whiskey under the stars. Caleb had once dragged him bleeding from a canyon no one else would have risked. Now Jed walked forward, boots crunching dirt. "Been a long time, Ward," he said, voice like gravel. Caleb waited, silent. Jed lowered himself by the fire, his grin catching in the flames. "Heard stories about you hauling a woman and her bastard out a dry creek like some night from a dime novel. Didn't believe it till now." Eliza stiffened, clutching the baby tighter. Caleb's steady glance told her to stay still. Jed chuckled. You're harboring a fugitive. Thomas Monroe put a bounty on her head, rich enough to draw hunters from Tucson clear to Santa Fe. We could split it, Caleb. One last ride together. You hand her over, we take the gold, and you'll never have to mend another fence post. Enough to buy a valley, build a herd big enough to blot out the horizon. The fire snapped. The desert went still. Eliza's breath caught. The words cut deep. She looked to Caleb, dreading his answer. He lowered his eyes to the tin cup in his hand, set it carefully on the dirt, weight thudding softly. His fingers brushed the grip of his revolver, but did not draw. When he lifted his gaze, his voice was quiet yet hard as iron. I don't trade people. Not her, not the child. That ain't my kind of gold. Jed's grin faltered. For a moment, he searched Caleb's face for hesitation. All he found was unshakable calm. The fire popped again. The baby whimpered against Eliza's chest. At last, Jed rose, brushing dust from his coat. You always were a fool, he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. One day, that kind of thinking will get you killed. Caleb didn't move. He only watched as Jed mounted and rode back into the dark. The sound of hooves faded until only the fire remained. For a long moment, no one spoke. The baby sighed and drifted back to sleep. Eliza's hands shook as she smoothed the blanket over her child. Finally, her voice broke, trembling. Why, you could have had everything. Gold, land, safety. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the flames. When he answered, the words were simple, but carried the weight of stone. Because some things ain't for sale. Not life, not dignity. Eliza's eyes burned. She looked at him. This man who had dragged her from shame, shielded her child with his own body, and now turned away from fortune itself rather than see her broken. And in that moment she understood Caleb Ward did not protect her out of pity or duty or some code of an old rancher. He chose her. He chose to stand, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The fire crackled on, sparks rising into the desert sky. Eliza pressed her child close, her tears falling silently. This time, not from despair, but from the fragile truth that she was no longer alone. The storm rolled over Dry Creek like a beast unleashed. Rain pounding roofs, wind tearing shutters loose. Lightning split the sky, throwing the crooked town into bursts of white. Townsfolk crowded into the church, its walls groaning under the gale. Lanterns flickered, trembling against the beams. At the center stood Thomas Monroe. His fine coat clung to him, soaked through, but his voice cut sharp above the storm. She deceived us all, he roared. Eliza, a liar with another man's bastard in her arms. And Caleb Ward, he's no savior. He's a thief who stole her to claim land not his. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, suspicion rising like a second storm. Outside, Caleb stood in the rain, one hand on his horse, the other steadying Eliza as she clutched her child. The church loomed before them, the place of her ruin, and now her return. She met his eyes. He nodded. Together they stepped inside. The doors banged open, thunder cracking behind. All eyes turned. Eliza, pale but unbroken, child in her arms. Caleb, tall, silent, rain dripping from his hat. Thomas's face flushed red. There, the traitor himself, dragging his back into God's house. You'll regret this, Ward. His hired men shifted, hands grazing their guns. Caleb's boots echoed as he stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. You left her at these steps, Thomas. I picked her up, not for gold, not for land, because no man deserves to be left in the dust with a crying child. The words rang like a bell. Whispers stirred louder. Doubt spread. Thomas's rage boiled. You're a pretender, a killer playing righteous. His hand flew to his revolver. He pointed it at Eliza, shouting, you should have died in that cell. Chaos erupted. Gasps, screams, feet shuffling. Eliza froze, clutching her baby. Caleb moved. He shoved Eliza and child behind the pulpit, twisting as his revolver cleared leather. Thunder roared with the crack of gunfire. Thomas shot first. The bullet grazed Caleb's side, tearing fabric. Caleb fired back, not at Thomas, but the beam behind him. Wood splintered, shards exploding. Thomas stumbled, revolver flying from his grip, crashing to his knees. The church hushed but for the raging storm outside. Thomas scrambled backward, pale and gasping, arrogance stripped away. His hired men froze, cowed by Caleb's glare. Caleb's voice was iron. If any of you still believe his lies, stand with him. But if you've got eyes, you saw the man he is. The silence cracked. One by one, townsfolk stirred. A woman who once drew water with Eliza laid a trembling hand on her shoulder. I believe her, she whispered. Others followed, men who had traded with her late husband. Neighbors once cold. Slowly they crossed the room standing between Eliza and Thomas. Thomas's face twisted. You fools, he spat, scrambling to his feet. You will regret this. But no one moved. No one raised a hand in his defense. He staggered to the door, broken, vanishing into the storm. His name sank into the mud with each step. The church quieted. Rain hammered the roof. The storm raging beyond. Eliza wept freely, clutching her child, not from despair, but release. She turned to Caleb, bloodied and breathless. Revolver lowered, his eyes softened. He reached for her hand, his grip firm, grounding her. For the first time since she had been cast aside, the weight lifted from her chest. The storm had broken, and with it, so had her chains of shame. The storm that had torn through Dry Creek left the streets washed clean, as if the town itself sought to forget the ugliness it had harbored. For weeks after that night, whispers still floated in doorways and around market stalls. Some muttered of scandal, of shame, of a woman who should have never returned. But others began to speak differently. They spoke of Thomas as he truly was, greedy, cowardly, a man who had twisted lies to seize land and gold. And they spoke of Eliza not as the abandoned bride, but as the woman whom Caleb Ward, the silent rancher, had shielded when no one else dared. Caleb never cared for their words, but he noticed how Eliza began to lift her head higher when she walked beside him, the child cradled against her. The weight she had carried for so long was no longer hers alone. At his ranch, life settled into quiet rhythm. Caleb sold off a portion of his cattle, the coins enough to buy timber and tools. With his own hands, he raised stronger walls, mended the roof so the rain would never again seep through, and built a small room with a window that caught the morning light. It was for Eliza and her child. He never said as much, but she knew when she found the clean quilt folded at the foot of the cradle he had carved himself, rough, uneven, yet steady as the man who had shaped it. There were small moments woven into the fabric of their days. Caleb showing her how to sit astride a horse, his hand firm at her waist as she trembled with nerves. His gruff patience as he taught her to guide the reins. His quiet pride when she laughed for the first time in months as the horse carried her across the pasture. On cold nights, he sat by the fire long after she and the child had gone to sleep, feeding the flames, his eyes never leaving the small wooden cradle. More than once, Eliza woke to find him there at dawn, his broad frame bent with fatigue, but his gaze soft, as though he were guarding not just the child, but something fragile in himself. One evening, after the baby had drifted into slumber, Eliza sat by the hearth, watching Caleb run a cloth across his weathered saddle. Her voice came quiet, almost lost to the crackle of the fire. I was left at the church steps with nothing but shame, she whispered. But you gave me a home. He paused, the cloth stilling in his hand. For a long moment, he did not look at her. Then he set the saddle aside, his rough fingers brushing lightly across hers. His voice was low, steady. Home ain't walls, Eliza, he said. It's who you share the fire with. Her throat tightened. She turned her hand to catch his, holding it in the glow of the firelight, and for the first time she believed the word home belonged to her. When spring came, the grassland stretched green beneath a sky washed clean of winter's storms. One morning, as the sun rose in a blaze of gold, Caleb stepped onto the porch with the child in his arms. Eliza stood beside him, her shawl drawn close, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The baby gurgled softly, reaching a tiny hand toward the light. Caleb's arms shifted protectively, and Eliza's hands slipped into his. Together they stood as the dawn broke fully. 3 shadows cast long across the open fields. A woman once cast aside, a man who had built his life in silence, and a child who bound them together. Not broken remnants, but a family born from ash, forged in fire, and steady as the land itself. As the morning sun bathed the prairie in gold, their shadows stretched across the open land, 3 figures standing, where once there had been only loneliness and loss. Eliza, no longer the abandoned bride, but a woman who had found her strength. Caleb, no longer the silent rancher alone with his ghosts, but a man who had chosen love over silence. And the child, no longer a secret of shame, but the heart of a new beginning. In the West, where law was harsh and mercy rare, they had found something worth more than land, more than gold, a home built not of timber and stone, but of trust, sacrifice, and love. And as the horizon called them onward, their story lingered, a reminder that even in the harshest of frontiers, love can still take root and grow. If this tale stirred your heart, don't write away just yet. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more journeys into the untamed frontier, where romance, grit, and destiny meet beneath the wide, endless skies. Eyes.